Satkamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya, Aviravirmayedhi, Rudrayatte Dakshinam Mukham, Tena Mam Pahi Nityam. May the divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the divine consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So this weekend we have been remembering some stories and trying to see what lessons we learn from these stories. So today I will share with you another story. This story is about a king who one day felt that he needed some guidance about how to run his kingdom well. And he felt that if he had answers to 3 questions, he would be able to do a better job as a king. And the 3 questions that came to his mind were, what is the best time to do anything? That was the first question. The second one was, who are the best people to work with? And the third question was, which is the most important thing to do? If we put these questions in the kind of phrases we are more familiar with today, it was basically about time management, people management, and project management, if you like. So that's essentially was his thing, that which is the best time to do? How to manage my time well? Which is the best time to do anything? Which are the best people that I should have to do something? And what is the best work? Which is the most important work? And so, because the kings have a lot of ways of getting answers, so he said, he just made an announcement throughout his kingdom that whoever can give the best answer to these questions will be given a big reward. So an incentive for people with ideas to come forward and provide answers to these questions. And of course, when there is a big reward, you can imagine a lot of people came to the king's palace to give their answers to the question, hoping that their answers would, in the king's opinion, would be the best and they might win the reward. So you can imagine, for the first question, for instance, which is the best time to do anything? So some people came up with the answer is the most sensible thing to do is to chalk up a routine, have a schedule for yourself, that this is the time for work, this is the time for recreation, this is the time for this is the time for that. If you can have a good schedule and stick to that schedule, then you will be able to know exactly what to do when. So that was one suggestion, which was seemed pretty obvious. Then some other people said, one can never know. Some emergencies come up. So you just have to be attentive and just see whatever needs to be done at any given time, just do it. Planning too much in advance may not be helpful. But another suggestion was that since we are all uncertain about what is going to happen, to bring some certainty, better to have some astrologers around who can tell us what might happen in future. So that might help us decide how to set up our routine. In this way, many different suggestions came. About the second question, which are the best people to work with? Again, we find a range of answers came. So some people suggested to the king that the best people to work with are good administrators who have trained in administration, they know people management, get them to be around you. Another group of people suggested that, no, you need some priests and holy people around you because they will give you a completely unbiased opinion about everything. And then some others said, no, you need traders, business people, because they are very sharp, because they know they can calculate what's good for the kingdom, what will make more profit, what will be less profit. So get such experts. So again, you found a range of advices regarding what kind of people we should have around us. A third question was about which is the most important thing to do. Again, you can imagine that a range of answers came for that as well. Some people felt that as a king, the most important thing was defense. So he said, the people said, use all your resources for increasing the military power of the kingdom. Some others said, no, the most important work is agriculture, because the more food you have, the people in the kingdom will be strong and better. You found again a range of opinions about what is the most important thing. Now, it so happened that in spite of such variety of answers that the king got, none of these answers really impressed him. He felt, yeah, I mean, these are good answers. They're not bad, quite predictable in some ways, but he didn't feel that that'll necessarily, any of these answers would help him run the kingdom in a better way than what he was already doing. He felt that there must be some better answer, some clearer answer, something that will make him a better king, a better human being. And so he thought about it for some days. He sent away all these people saying, nobody has gotten their reward because none of you have satisfied me. It was very tough to satisfy these kings. They were very moody also, as you can see, many of the stories we have about kings and emperors. You never knew what will satisfy them. Anyway, in this instance, none of these answers satisfied the king. And so nobody got the reward. And the king spent some time reflecting on it. Then finally, he decided that in the outskirts of his kingdom, in far outside the capital of the kingdom, there was a hill, a kind of a forest area. And on top of a hill, a very saintly person, a sadhu, was staying there. And that sadhu lived there. He never came down that hill, spent his time up there. And he was known that he did not want to do anything to do with wealthy people or powerful people. He just completely led a solitary life. The king thought that since that sadhu, who is known to be an enlightened being, if I go to that sadhu and ask him, maybe he might be able to answer these questions to my satisfaction. But he knew that if he went there as a king, dressed as a king, then that sadhu wouldn't want to meet, because it was known that he doesn't want to meet wealthy or powerful people. So this king went to that hill, and all his attendants, he made them wait at the foot of the hill. And he dressed up like a very poor farmer. And then he thought, dressed up as disguised as a poor man, he wasn't much accustomed to all this hardship, but he somehow or the other, he managed to go up that hill. Then when he reached the top of that hill, he found that cottage, that little cottage in which that sadhu lived. And as he walked up to that cottage, he found that the sadhu was already outside the cottage, working in the garden. There was a small little garden outside the cottage. And this sadhu was quite an old man. And he was working. He was with a spade. He was digging in the garden. So this king goes there. And of course, the sadhu has no idea he's king because he's disguised as a poor man. And so the sadhu looks at him and nods at him and continues digging. So this poor man who is this king. Now I'll just refer to him as king, but you remember that he is now disguised as a poor man. So this king then goes to this sadhu near him, sits there for a while, and tells him, you know, I have three questions. I have some doubts, and I hope that you will be able to answer my questions. So he tells that sadhu, who is continuing to dig in the garden, he said, these are my three questions. Which is the most important thing to do anything? Who are the best people to work with? And what is the most important work to do? So this sadhu heard his questions, nodded, and then continued to dig again without answering. So this king thought, oh, let me wait for a while. Maybe after he finishes that row, he might come and answer my question. But that row was over. He started digging another row in another row in the garden. Then this king felt, oh, and then he saw that poor man, the sadhu was at once sweating and he was really old. So king said, okay, you know, you have been digging for a long time. Why don't you rest for some time? Let me do. The king thought once that work is over, he might get an answer. And to speed up that work, he thought he will finish it himself. So he told that sadhu, you just take rest. I will do the digging. The sadhu was happy. He gave the spade in his hand and then rested a while. And this king then started digging in the garden. So he dug in two more rows, the king did. And then he paused a little bit. And then he told that sadhu, maybe would you like to answer my questions now, please? And then the sadhu again, instead of answering his questions, said, you know, I think you need to take a little rest now. Let me do the digging now. And then this king thought, the king was relatively young compared to the sadhu. And then he said, no, okay, no, I will do it myself. So he continued, the king continued to dig. But slowly, the sun began to set and started getting dark. And finally, the king gave up hope that I'm not going to get any answers. And it's already getting dark. So he stopped and he told this sadhu, he said, look, it's getting dark now and I need to return home. So would you please answer those three questions that I asked you? In the meantime, the sadhu then just looked across and told this king, hey, wait a minute. Do you hear? Do you see someone coming from there? And indeed, they saw a man was coming from a distance, running toward them to the cottage. A man with a long beard, and he was kind of clutching at his stomach. And he seemed in pain. He came running toward them and almost collapsed there. And then they found this man had been stabbed. And there's all blood coming from his stomach area. So of course, the king just held him. The man collapsed, almost was unconscious. And the first thing, of course, to do was to just help stop that bleeding. So the king immediately tried his best. And when the blood started coming, king removed his own shirt and tied, because there wasn't any bandages or no first aid available there. He tried his best when a lot of blood was lost. The king did everything. Finally, the blood stopped flowing. And the man was, of course, unconscious. They just, along with the help of the sadhu, it had already gotten pretty dark by then. So then they carried this man, this wounded man, inside that small little cottage of the sadhu. And then there was a bed. The sadhu said, let him lie on my bed. So that wounded man was put on that bed. They made that man comfortable, gave a little water to him. And as the man went to sleep there, the king was exhausted. I doubt ever in his life he had done so much physical labor as he did that day. So the king was so tired that he, just leaning against the wall, the king also fell asleep. Then when his eyes opened, the sun had already risen. He was so exhausted, whole night he just went to sleep in that room itself, leaning against the wall. So when he opened his eyes, the king was rather confused, like, where am I? And then he suddenly remembered that he had come the previous day, walked up the hill, and all the thing that had happened. In the meantime, that wounded man who had had in good rest that night, he also opened his eyes. He also became conscious. As soon as he saw this king next to him in that same room, that wounded man was, now this wound was healing after that night's rest. He just looked at the king and said, "Please forgive me." And the king was surprised, like, "Forgive you for what? What have you done that you need forgiveness?" And then that man told his story. So that man who had come, the wounded man who had come the previous evening, he said that he considered himself the king's enemy. He said during the last war, the king's soldiers had killed this man's brother and confiscated their property. So he said, "I had made up my mind, I'm going to kill you for destroying my family. So when I had got the news that you are going to come to meet this sadhu on the top of the hill, I hid myself on one side of the hill with the idea that when you come up, I will come and kill you." But he said, as I was waiting for you, and it probably happened that the king went up a different way. So this man who was waiting to kill that king didn't even see him. So then he said, "I came out of my hiding and was searching for you because I wanted to kill you. Unfortunately, your attendants who were waiting at the foot of the hill, they saw me and they recognized me that I am their enemy because they knew about what had happened in the last war. And they chased me, and it was they who attacked me. And that's how I got hurt." And he told the king, "If you had not nursed me well yesterday, if you hadn't taken care of me, I would be a dead man now." And so he said, "I'm so grateful. I seek your forgiveness for even thinking of killing you. And now," he said, "I'm your servant forever. All my life will serve you. And I'll tell my children also when they grow up to be loyal to you and to serve you." The king was very surprised at hearing all this and also happy that someone who thought of himself as an enemy had now become a friend, a very loyal friend who wanted to serve him. So the king called his attendants and made sure that this man would be well taken care of. He said, "Send him my physician so that he heals well." And then he went to take leave of that sadhu and told him, "I'm sorry I came disguised as this poor man, thinking that if you knew I was a king, you may not meet me. So I'm sorry for trying not to be honest about my identity." But, and once again, the king thought he can give one last try. He said, "Could you please answer my questions? You remember the questions I asked you yesterday? Could you please answer them?" And then the sadhu looked at that king and said, "The questions have already been answered." And then the king said, "How come? How so?" Then the sadhu said, "Look, when you came yesterday to meet me, the best time was the time you spent working in that garden. The most important person was me. And the most important work that you did was to relieve me from my work and you digging there. Because he said, if you had not done that, then you would have immediately returned down the hill. And this man who was waiting for you, they would have killed you. Then he said, when this man came, this wounded man came, the best time you spent was the time you spent taking care of that wounded man. The most important person at that time was that wounded person. And the most important thing to do was taking care of him. And he said, because you did that, that one who was your enemy is now become your friend. And then he said, the best time to do anything is now. We cannot do anything tomorrow because tomorrow has not yet come. We cannot do anything yesterday. Yesterday is already gone. The only time we can do anything is at this moment. And then the sadhu told the king, the most important person to work with is the person who is right in front of you at this very moment. And the most important thing to do is the one who is in front of you, try to make that person happy. So those were the answers which the king was satisfied with. He realized that if that is the way I rule my kingdom, I can be truly an ideal king. And that is the answer for all of us, irrespective of our gender, our age, our work, or whatever our background. These answers apply to all of us. That the only time that really matters in our life is this present moment. And as we saw earlier, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, none of us knows what is going to happen in the future. Of course, the uncertainty about future has become even more it has struck home more tangibly now during the time of the pandemic, because we really never before in the lifetimes of most of us, we have had this hundreds and thousands of people dying and reports about people getting infected. So the uncertainty about life, the vulnerability of our existence has become more real to us today. But this is not something new. It's not as if before the pandemic, people were not dying. But now, because it's happening in such large numbers with one specific cause, it has come to our notice more quickly. But otherwise, also, even at any given so-called normal time, every moment, someone or the other is dying. And there could be some moment that someone or the other could be me. And therefore, the only time that we can be absolutely sure about is this moment. Swami Vivekananda once said that these are his exact words. Time is but the method of our thinking. That we are the eternal present tense. Normally we segment time into past, present, and future. But these are not very rigid groups, rigid classifications, because they are very dynamic ways of dividing it. Because think about it, every second. So this second now, in the very next moment, that has become the past. and the moment that is yet to come, which was future, as the next moment become the present. It's like tomorrow. As sometimes we say, tomorrow never comes, because tomorrow, what is tomorrow today will become today tomorrow, right? What is today will become yesterday tomorrow. Does this make sense? So just as these are not fixed nomenclatures, so the idea of kind of dividing time into past, present, and future, just the way our mind likes to think. But in reality, the only thing that we have with us is the present moment. Now think about how much of our life we are truly living. Because when we are immersed thinking of the past, memories about what happened in the past, sometimes we see you can just be sitting in one place and thinking about yesterday or 6 months ago or 10 years ago or whatever, and maybe half an hour goes by, you're thinking about the past. That half an hour is lost from your life. It's as if you didn't live it because you were thinking about the past. Or if I sit and just be planning for the future, that also doesn't belong to me because future is not here. Now, planning is good. It's not that planning is bad. But even when we are planning for the future, that planning is occurring in the present. The only thing we truly have with us is the present. We don't have the future because it has not come yet. The past has already gone, never to come back. So the best time, the sadhu told the king, is this moment. So in spiritual life, therefore, we have to be very aware of what is happening in this present moment. And that's why when we sit for japa and meditation, one of the challenges most of us have is about the mind getting distracted. The mind gets distracted by things that have happened in the past or worries or anxieties about the future. The more we train ourselves to say, I'm going to live in the present, we will see that the quality of our meditation will improve. Because we can encounter, we can have a direct perception of our Ishta, of the divine in our heart, only now, only in the present moment. We cannot have it in the past, we cannot have it in the future. The next thing is the most important person. Now, throughout the day, we will meet different people at different times. Sometimes there is a phrase which is now pretty much common all over the world, but VIP, very important people, as if it is some special kind of a category. And in secular life, people holding high positions in society or in politics, or people who are celebrities, or people who are like very close to us, we generally say, oh, this is the most important person for me. Which is good in its own way, all of that makes sense. But in reality, think about it. The most important person at any given moment is the person right now who is in front of me. Because that could be the last time I may be with that person. Because life being so uncertain, maybe I may never see that person again in life. That might be the last time I may be dealing with that person. And so, just as it is helpful spiritual practice to think of every day in our life as being potentially the last day of our life, think of every encounter with every person also could be, this could be potentially the last encounter with that person. If it is so, then we want that encounter to be a memorable one. Think about it, life will change, our relationships will change for the better. It'll be very different outlook. That's what will help us treat one another with respect, with love, with understanding. And the most important work at any time would be to live according to dharma, to do what is right, to do what is good. Sometimes our judgment could go wrong. We might do something right, thinking it is right, but in retrospect, it might turn out to be wrong. That's okay. People can make mistakes. But in good faith, we must at every moment, whenever we are faced with the decision of what I should do this or should I do that? Should I do it in one way or should I do it the other way? What are the criteria that we apply in making choices in life? Now, as spiritual seekers, if we think of ourselves as devotees, as people who are spiritual or are trying to be spiritual, then one way of looking at that decision making would be anything that takes me nearer to God or anything that makes me unselfish, anything that brings out the love and understanding and friendship more from my heart, that is the kind of choice I should make. But if any action or any decision that will tend to make me more selfish or that will take me away from my ideal, then that is not the kind of choice we should take. And then decision making becomes much easier if we have some such rule of thumb to follow. Otherwise, things can get very confusing. And a lot of times we feel, and that was the kind of confusion even Arjuna had on the battlefield. What shall I do? I'm confused. What is my duty? And choices in life may not always be very easy, because most of the time, I think, or at least a good amount of time, the choice in life is not always between right and wrong. Because I think a choice between right and wrong is somewhat easy to deal with. Well, just do what is right and don't do what is wrong. I mean, that's simple. But a lot of times the choice is not between black and white, but between different shades of gray. Something might be, oh, this is right, but this is also a little wrong. And this is wrong, but this is also a little right. And now what shall I choose? It's not a very clear right versus wrong choice. So we need some kind of a yardstick to decide what should be chosen. And all of us, again, there is no one magic formula for this, but we all have to find our own ways of deciding what is the right thing to do in any given situation. So this story was originally told by Leo Tolstoy, the great Russian writer. He was almost like a saint. There's amazing things we learn from his stories about the most important time, the most important people, and the most important work. So I thought this was one story that I could share with you. And a second story is probably, I may have mentioned it before, but it's one of my favorite stories. So I'm going to inflict it on you once again. So this is the story about one man who had this one fine morning. He gets up and the newspapers arrived. Those were still the days when people read newspapers. And So when the newspaper arrived, he just tore it to pieces. And his family members thought, what's wrong with this man? And maybe it must have been some news in the paper which must have angered him, or so they thought probably he was just upset about something. But then they got worried that whatever papers were there in his room, he started tearing it to pieces. They thought, oh, now this really looks very serious. Then when he started tearing his dollar bills also, then they said, now it's really serious, like a real major problem. And then they didn't know what to do. So they first of all, the thing was they removed all dollar bills and all precious or important papers from the room. Otherwise, they said nothing is safe now in this person. And then the next thing, of course, they did was best immediately called up 911 or called up their physicians and said he needs immediate checkup. So they took him to the doctor, and the doctors heard, and they said best is to run all these different tests. So all the labs were taken, and all the reports came pretty normal. And then they said, well, I'll do a brain scan, and all of the medical procedures were undergone. And the family was wealthy, they had good insurance coverage, and so they spent a lot. But they were not able to find anything. Experts were called. They even tried Ayurveda, they tried homeopathy. Nothing. They could not diagnose the problem. Was this person was simply continued tearing papers. Finally, they just put him in a room without any papers and locked up the room. And whoever came up with new kind of therapies, they tried that. They tried psychotherapy, they tried magnetotherapy, everything. Nothing worked. And so they just gave up hope. There's some kind of a mysterious disease has come, and somehow he's just tearing paper. In all other respect, the person was normal. Only papers he was tearing. So finally, they just gave up hope. Now, when this news reached a family friend who came and then said, just a young doctor has just arrived in the next block and he's opened a clinic. Maybe you should show this person to him. And then family was by this time had lost hope. They said, we have gone to best experts, specialists. They couldn't do anything. Now this young medical graduate, how is he going to make it all right? Then they said, okay, let's give it a try. So finally they took the patient to this young doctor. This doctor had a small little office. So he listened to what the family had to say, that, this person has been tearing paper and we tried all these different things and nothing seems to work. So the doctor asked the family to sit down and he said, I just want to have a talk with the patient. So in the same room where the family was sitting, the doctor took hold of this patient, kind of put his arm around him like friends do, and they walked from one end of the room to the other end, just walked a couple of times. And while they were walking, this doctor whispered something in this patient's ear and then told the family, all right, you can take him now, he's cured. The family was like, oh my God, people have started making fun of us now. No treatment, no prescription, nothing. And they're saying he's cured. So anyway, they went home, but to their great surprise, this person was indeed cured. They found no papers were torn. It became completely normal as before. They were surprised. They said, what happened? This seems like magic. But this doctor didn't even do anything. The only thing he did was, we saw that he was telling something to him, but other than that, he didn't do anything. Anyway, the family is very happy that this long-standing problem was finally solved. So then they went the next day to the doctor, thanked him profusely for what he had done, and then asked him what his bill, how much had to be paid, and some modest amount. Wasn't some very expensive payment or anything. And then they asked him, by the way, we are a little bit curious. How did you manage this? How did you cure him? And the doctor he just shrugged his shoulders and said, no, well, I didn't really do anything. When you told me what the problem was you were tearing paper. So I just told him, stop tearing paper. And that worked. The problem was, with all these tests and treatments and therapies, no one had told him, don't do it. So what was the problem? The problem was he was tearing paper. The solution was he should stop doing it, and to tell him not to do it. Nobody had done that. Now, this story is kind of funny. I'm not like narrating some kind of actual anecdote, but it has a great message for us. And it is this, that what is the problem of human existence? And what are we doing to solve that problem? And oftentimes we will see that if we go to the root of the problem, find what the problem is, then the solution is right in front of us. But oftentimes we don't go to the root of the problem. And that is why we do all kinds of things thinking that the problem will be solved. So here the problem was simple. Someone was tearing paper. The solution was, hey, don't do it. But nobody told him not to do it, but they started doing all these running different tests. So in spiritual life, that is one kind of a danger that can occur to us. Sometimes people think, oh, I must do these 100 parayanas of this, or I must go to these long pilgrimages, or I must do these different kinds of austerities, and then I will see God. Now, I'm not saying that those things are useless, but the question is, why am I doing it? How will I see God by not eating? How will I see God by just reading a few books or listening to a few lectures? What is really the problem? Now, depending on how the problem is defined, our solution will be based on how the problem is defined. For instance, one way of defining the problem is that our present state, as you know, and the different stories that we find in different traditions will give us an idea of how the problem is defined. In Vedanta, the problem is defined as basically ignorance, that I have forgotten my true nature. Now, if I have forgotten my true nature, then the solution to the problem is I need to remember my true nature. If the problem is ignorance, the solution is knowledge. Now, no amount of just going pilgrimages to all over the world will by itself give me knowledge. Yes, there is a certain way of doing that pilgrimage which can help me get knowledge. But going on a pilgrimage itself, and just kind of, a lot of time you will see, pilgrimage can be a great spiritual activity, but people go on a pilgrimage, it becomes another touristic adventure. So going to a place as a tourist and going there as a pilgrim are two different things. So just because I go to a holy place, that does not become a pilgrimage unless I do the things that pilgrims do. I go with that mental preparation. Then that pilgrimage truly becomes a pilgrimage. Otherwise, hundreds and thousands of people go to, for instance, go to Benares or go to these different sacred spots all over the world. But that is not itself a guarantee that one is going closer to God. So similarly with everything, with all the spiritual practices that we do, If we do those practices mechanically, then we can only wonder that, oh, I've been doing this for so many years and nothing has happened. Of course, nothing has happened, because if I'm doing it just following the letter, but not the spirit, then nothing will happen. And so that is what the teachings of these great ones, when you see the teachings of Jesus, teaching of Buddha, teaching of Ramakrishna, all these great prophets who have come in our midst, their greatness is because they identified the problem accurately, and then their solution they gave, the instructions they gave, went to the root of the problem. And that's why oftentimes we find the teachings of these greatest among teachers are the simplest, because they just go to the root. And oftentimes the explanations of their teachings are more complicated than their teachings themselves. So these are the two stories I wanted to share with you. The first story is about the king with his 3 questions. And the second story is about this man who was tearing paper. So I will stop now. And if you have any thoughts, ideas,